Hello, guys. Sorry, have a little issue with my throat, but I'm trying to record this lesson as a quick review to what we've learned over the couple of weeks or so. So I'm going to quickly review some key things we discussed in class about fractions. Okay. So first of all, you know that if you have any fraction like this, we call the top one the numerator, and then we call the number at the bottom or the down part the denominator. All right, so the one on top is the numerator, the one at the bottom is the denominator. All right, and we talked about a couple of things. We know that we can change from fraction to decimals and from decimals to fraction. I'll be talking about that in this video. So because it's a review, I'm going to be a bit quick with what I'm going to talk about. So let's quickly see how we can change from a fraction to a decimal. Okay, so for our level, we'll mostly be talking about okay, before I even get there, let me just remind you that we talked about terminating decimals, and then repeating decimals. So some fractions, when we change them to decimals, they terminate. And you remember what we said terminating decimals are. If you have a decimal like 0.24, it is a terminating decimal because it starts from somewhere and it ends at the 4. It does not continue. But you can have another decimal which is 0.5555, on and on and on. It doesn't stop. So this is a repeating decimal, and we write that this way. We write the 5 and we put a bar on top of the 5, telling us that this is a repeating decimal. Okay, so there are some fractions that when we change to decimals, they terminate. And then there are other fractions that when you change to decimals, they do not terminate. And we call them repeating decimals. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so let's quickly see how we can change from fractions to decimals. So we'll only be talking about, that's what I was saying earlier, that for this level, we will not talk about changing all fractions, like how we're going to change all fractions to decimal, but we'll just talk about some types of fractions, or some fractions with some specific denominators. Okay, so we'll talk about how we can change some fractions with some specific denominators to decimals. So for instance, we'll see how we can change fractions with the denominator being 10 or 100 or 1,000, right? Or like in that form, maybe 10,000, or on and on and on. Or a fraction which has a denominator which is a factor of any of these numbers. All right, so we're going to talk about a fraction. You know what I mean by the denominator, the one that comes at the bottom here. So if you have a fraction whose denominator is one of these numbers, 10, 100, or 1,000, then we're going to see how we'll change those ones to decimals. Or even if they are not one of these numbers and they are a factor of one of these numbers. When we say a factor of one of these numbers, what I mean is any number that can divide 10 or 100 or 1,000, or that can, like as some will say, can go into 10 or 100 or 1,000. So for instance, 25 we know that 25 is not 10, 100, or 1000, but 25 can divide 100, right? What is 100 divided by 25? That is 4. So we're going to see how we can change any fraction which has a denominator to be 25 to a decimal, all right? I'm not going to spend much time talking about that. So let's quickly go into it, okay? So, sorry. Okay, so let's assume that we have this fraction, 2/10 or 2/10. How are we going to change that to a decimal? So what you can, we can look at it from different angles, but let's consider it this way. So let's look at the denominator here. What is the denominator? It is 10. And how many zeros are in this number 10 here? How many zeros? So we have just 1 0. So this is what we're going to do. The numerator is 2, and we're trying to introduce a decimal point into the numerator we see here. So what we're going to do is that we're going to introduce the decimal point from the end of the number, okay? Now, how many zeros do we have here? We said we have we have just 1 0. So what we do is that we're going to jump over this number one time because we have just 1 0. If we had 2 zeros, we'll jump over it 2 times. All right, but because we have just 1 0, we jump over it once, and then the decimal point will land right here. Okay, so we get 0.2, and then we introduce a 0 here in front of the point. Let's take another example. So let's say we have 51. I'm going to write the 1 again. It didn't look nice. So 51 over 1000. All right. So what we're going to do is that we're trying to change this one to a decimal. We're going to convert this or rewrite this one as a decimal. Remember how we did that? So we had a numerator written down here, which is 51. And then how many zeros do we have here? Let's count. 1, 2, 3. 3 zeros. So starting from the right side, we're going to introduce our decimal. We jump 1, 2, and 3. So where will our decimal point be? It is going to be here. But remember that after we jumped over the 5, we jumped again over nothing. And once we're jumping over nothing, we're going to introduce once we're jumping over nothing, we're going to introduce 0 in there, okay? I'm just using a different color for you to see that there was nothing there and we jumped over it. And that is going to give us 0.051. And do not forget that we always put a point, we put a 0 before the point. So we don't want to start the number with just point. We just don't want to start the number before with just the point. So let's introduce 0 before the point and then 051. Now again, where did we get the 0 from? Remember, there were 3 zeros in the denominator. So we made 3 jumps. First jump landed here, and then we jumped again, second jump here. But we had to jump again. But then there was no number, but we still have to jump. And then once we jumped, we landed here. And because we jumped over nothing here, we introduced a 0 there. Because we jumped over nothing, we introduced a 0 there. So that gives us point. Remember, our point lands here. So that gives us 0.051. And if we have 0.051, we introduce a 0 in front of the point. Always, unless the decimal lands in between two numbers already, if it ends before all the numbers we have there, we're going to introduce a 0. For instance, if the decimal point, anyway, we'll get to examples like that. All right, so let's take a third example. So let's imagine we have, let's say 37 over 100. We're trying to rewrite this as a decimal. So what do? We have 3, 7. And then let's look at the denominator. How many zeros are in the denominator? 2. We only have to count, right? We see two zeros in there. So once we see 2 zeros in there, what do? We're going to introduce the decimal point. So we're going to jump 2 times, 1 and 2. So where would the decimal point be? So our decimal will be here. So we're going to get 0.37, right? When we introduce a decimal point, the points landed here, so we get 0.37, and then we introduce a 0 in there. All right, let's take another example. So let's assume we have this here, 291 over 100. All right, forgive my writing. 291 over 100. So we're going to rewrite it as a decimal. And to rewrite this as a decimal, what do? So we have 291. And then let's look at the denominator. How many zeros do we have there? We have 2 zeros. So we're going to introduce our decimal point. Where do we start from? We start from this side. We jump once and twice. So we jump 2 times, right? Because we have 2 zeros. So we jump 2 times. So what do we get? We have 2.91. Now, you see that in the previous ones, we introduced a 0 from the left. That was because the decimal landed after the numbers, right? So like we had 291, we jump beyond the numbers, we have to introduce a 0. But for this particular example, we see that the decimal landed in between 2 numbers, right? So the decimal didn't land after the numbers. So there is 2 before the decimal. So we don't need to introduce any 0. You understand? We don't need to introduce any 0. All right, let's take another question. So let's say we have sorry, let me use a different color. All right, so let's say we have 4 over 25. And then we want to rewrite this as a decimal. But remember that the ones we're doing at first, we had the denominators as 10, 100, or 1,000, or like in that form. But this one, what is the denominator? 25. But 25 doesn't look like this. It doesn't look like any of these. It doesn't look like any of these numbers. So what are we going to do? Okay, remember that when I was starting, I said when the number is a factor of any of these numbers, we can still do it pretty easy. So what are we going to do here? Can we rewrite the 25 for it to become one of these numbers? Yes. So if we multiply 25 by 4, that is going to give us 100, right? 25 times 4 gives us 100. But whatever we're doing to the denominator, we're going to do the same to the numerator. Whatever we're doing to the denominator, we'll do the same to the numerator. So we'll multiply the numerator also by 4, which is going to give us 16. Now, after getting the 16, after getting, oh, I'm going to rewrite this, sorry. So after getting what we had here, which is 16 over 100, what we're going to do is that we're going to take this 16 over 100 and then we're going to change it to a decimal. The 16 over 100 and 25, 4 over 25, although they look different, their value is the same, because all that we did was that we multiplied 4 to the numerator and the denominator. So they look different, but their value is the same. So when we change this to a fraction and we change this to a fraction, it's going to give us the same. Sorry, if we change this to a decimal and we change this to a decimal, it is actually going to be the same. So now let's go ahead to change 16 over 100 to a decimal. So it's the same method that we've been using. What do? Let's write our 16 down. How many zeros we have here? We have 2 zeros. So we're going to jump 2 times. And then our decimal point is going to be here. So this is going to be 0.16. There you go. So when we change 4 over 25 to a decimal, it's going to give us 0.16. I'm going to go over this question again. So what do? 25 doesn't look like a 10 or 100 or 1,000. So what we're going to do is that we're going to look at the denominator and see how we can rewrite it for it to become like one of these numbers. So what we'll do is that we multiplied 4 by 25, which gives us 100. And then we do the same, multiply 4 by 4, the numerator, which gives us 16. So 16 over 100. And then once we have it in this form, 16 over 100, we can easily change to a decimal. All right, let's take another example here. Give me a sec. All right, so let's assume we have, let me change this color for it to look a bit different. So let's assume we have 3/8 or 3 over 8, and we're trying to change this to a decimal. We're going to rewrite this as a decimal. How are we going to do that? So 8 doesn't really look like a 10 or 20. Sorry, it doesn't look like a 10 or 100 or 1,000, or you know what I'm talking about. So what are we going to do? We have to rewrite the 8 for it to look like one of those numbers. But we know that when we multiply, I'm going to go down, so I'll write it here. So when we multiply 8 by 125, that will give us 1,000. And this is what we're trying to look for. This, when we have a denominator like this, it becomes really easy for us to work with. So remember what we're going to do next? Once we have this, I said whatever thing you did to the denominator, you do the same thing to the numerator. So for the denominator, we multiplied by 125. So we multiply the numerator also by 125. So what is 3 times 125? That should give us 375. All right. So what we have here is 375 over 1000. So what do you think? Once we have this, it becomes really easy for us to rewrite as a fraction, as a decimal. Sorry, I keep mixing up the words. So once we have this, we can easily rewrite as a decimal. So let's take the numerator. Now, how many zeros do we have in the denominator? Let's count. 1, 2, 3. So we have 3 zeros in the denominator. So how many jumps do we make? 1, 2, 3. And then our decimal point is going to be here. Is there another thing that we need to do? Remember, because the decimal landed beyond the numbers, we're going to introduce a 0 in there. So we get 0.375. All right. I don't want the video to be so long, so I'm going to end it here. And then for the other part, I'm going to record another video to help you understand. So then in the next video, we'll see how we can convert some fractions to repeating decimals, right? So what if the fraction gives a repeating decimal? How are we going to do that? So for instance, if we have something like, let's say 2 over 9. Let's say we have 2 over 9. How are we going to change that to a decimal? All right? That is a really interesting one. So I hope you enjoy that one too. All right. So I'm going to end this one here and see you in the next video.